All right, welcome back to Shadow Shorts. If we've never met before, my name is Jeff Echols. I am a senior advisor and the head of marketing for Shadow Partners. And every weekday, I bring to you a conversation with an expert or a thought leader in the realm of innovation for the built environment. Today is no different. This is our guest today is very popular in our circles and is a past keynote speaker for Shadow Summit, a future keynote speaker for Shadow Summit. So I'm really excited about that. And let me introduce to you Dr. Sam Chandan. He is the founding director of the Chen Institute for Global Real Estate at NYU Stern. He's also a professor of economics at NYU. And Sam and I were talking about maybe getting into a conversation about the economics and what's driving the future of real estate investment in the United States and probably globally as well. So, Sam, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for doing this.
Thrilled to be here, Jeff.
Absolutely glad that you're here. And thinking about what we were talking about before we went live. You mentioned Office Space, not the movie,
Yeah.
but the actual space as
Yep.
As a driver of many things, not just where we're going to work, or not just the leases, so to speak, but when you're looking out there across the landscape, and considering all the financial and economic impacts, what does Office Space say to you right now?
Sure. I think we face real challenges in the office sector.
Mhm.
That's clear. And if we look back to beginning in March 2020, and
Mhm.
for probably 9 to 12 months, after that, there was a realization that there would be this period of time where our use of office spaces and the extent to which we would engage in our urban cores in the United States and other parts of the world, and major global capitals, whether London, Shanghai, New York, Chicago, or Atlanta, that we were constrained. I think what folks did not fully appreciate in the early stages of the pandemic is that we would find new ways to work, or that we would become much more open to ways of working that were not new per se, but where our cultural and our workplace norms had precluded our being able to say, 2 days a week I'm going to work remotely, whether that be at home or at a third location.
Right.
And it's really been over the last, I'd say, 2 years that we've had to come to grips with the fact that the way in which we think about our relationship to our offices, the way we think about our relationship to our downtown cores, and more broadly, when we think about our individual relationships to the built environment and our community relationships to the built environment, we are in a state of very rapid evolution. Now, it's the
Mhm.
case that our relationship to buildings, and to urban areas is always evolving and changing. What is different this time is that it is evolving and changing far more rapidly than anything that we will have seen in our lifetimes. And that is proving to be a very, very difficult adjustment process. In the office sector, it is playing out over time. And in part, this is because of changes in the level of transaction activity, valuations, the lease rollovers that in many cases are proving, dilutive to cash flow. And we're seeing sort of, a bifurcation in the office market clearly, where some older buildings that are, I'd say, competitively obsolete, either because of their location, their ceiling heights, the amenities, their proximity to public
Right.
transportation, whichever it may be, they're competitively obsolete. People are to think very carefully about what the next life might be for that building, because it might not be as an office. Earlier, a lot of folks, immediately ran to this idea that, okay, all these obsolete office buildings, particularly if they're in the urban core, would make ideal apartment buildings. And we know that
Yeah.
in many urban cores around the United States, we have a shortage of multifamily. I think, again, sort of as we've explored these issues and ideas more carefully, what we've come to understand is that only a small subset of these older office buildings is actually suitable for repurposing as multifamily. And we've got a lot of assets where, time will tell. And we're going to have to bring significant, creativity to bear, and financing to actually find that next life. On the other side of this, we have, a subset of very competitive Class A buildings that are in just the right location, have just the right amenity profile, are just close enough to public transportation. That from a tenant's perspective, if you do want to engage actively, with your team, give them that right set of incentives to want to come back to the office, to feel like, okay, it's not just coming into work, but the location, the layouts, the spaces are such that I'm able to have very meaningful interactions with my coworkers, right? I see the benefit of being there because that process of idea generation or collaboration or mentorship or whatever it is, depending on my particular firm and role and our industry, those buildings that really lend themselves to the case for office. In many cases, are doing quite well, and so there are differences there. The key issue for us when we think about sort of that that challenge or that headwind in the market that is under assessed is that again the challenges that we face in the built environment and our relationship to it are much bigger than office. They are
Mm.
about how we think about the role of the urban core in supporting local economies. They are, and again, it's not just the office space; it's all the spaces that are complementary. Folks will point to retail right away, sort of that. In New York, certainly referred to as a bodega or a sandwich shop, or a place where you might pick up a cup of coffee. Those locations and those spaces that serve the office tenant are clearly struggle in this environment. But I think what's also true is that we can look even more broadly at all of the public spaces and public amenities that support a vibrant downtown. And in New York, Chicago, Boston, cities that are heavily dependent upon a viable, well-functioning public transportation system. Part of the challenge that we face is in thinking about not only how do we present a stable and reliable set of public finances at the city level. But how is it that we ensure the continued viability and stability and affordability of our public transportation infrastructure? And in a place like New York, this is very real. If we are going to see public transit ridership that is 15, 20, 25% lower on average over the course of a week or over the course of a month or quarter, as compared to the levels of transit activity that we would have been able to clock before the pandemic. Longer term, that's simply not sustainable. But what we also know is that the value of New York City's agglomeration, our ability to function as a city, is substantially impaired. Without a well-functioning public transportation system. So all of these things really lend themselves to a broader conversation about how it is that we position cities to be relevant and to be competitive, in this, whether we refer to it as a post-pandemic environment or simply sort of, this radically changed environment that was already beginning to experience some of these forces at work,
Mm.
independent of the pandemic itself.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's paradoxical, isn't it? Um, so as you're looking out, we're past the middle of 2023 now, obviously. So headed towards the end of 2023, 24, 25. As you're looking out into the future, where do you see the most, or maybe recommend the most emphasis on development, on investment, on thinking about, as you said, if there's a 25% lower ridership of the CTA in Chicago, or pick your transit system wherever you are,
Right.
it's not sustainable. So it's going to take some innovation. So as you look out in the future, where do you see investment? Where do you see innovation happening in order to survive these things that you're talking about?
Yeah, so it comes back to a broader definition of
Mhm.
resilience. I think prior to
Mhm.
the pandemic, we thought of resilience principally in terms of resilience to climate shocks, and certainly that is key and essential. And I know that the work that the Shadow team is doing sort of is plays an important role here in helping to facilitate some of the new technologies that will aid us in building resilience. To
Mhm.
climate shocks that may be difficult to, from an actuarial perspective, to anticipate frequency and severity, but also sort of the broader trends that we're seeing impacting our cities. The I think post pandemic we think of resilience more broadly. Certainly, it's about climate issues, and in New York City, sort of your rising sea levels, sort of the heat sink of the city. These are very real issues for us, and we've been reminded of that quite regularly this summer, as have other parts of the world. Air quality, being a key issue. The other dimensions of resilience, I'd suggest, include things like, to come back to sort of the previous part of our conversation, local public finance. We think about why it is that people locate in a place like Atlanta or New York or Chicago or Boston. As an economic agent, I'm fundamentally more productive by being located in this place. What we also know is that by being located in these places, in part because of the density and the good and the bad that comes from it, there's a higher cost. Where we face real challenges is that in some cases, those costs and benefits are a little bit out of balance right now. And so when cities are thinking creatively about how do we reimagine ourselves, how do we reposition ourselves, what are the kinds of investments we make, we can work to contain costs. And a big part of that is in many cities, including New York, getting smart about tax efficiency becomes critically important, because this is an area where whether we think of it as competing with other cities or simply doing the best that we can for our own residents, we are highly tax inefficient. But those raise the costs of being in these locations. We have to ensure that the benefits that accrue from that urban agglomeration are always clearly stronger than the cost. That it's expensive to be in New York, but it is absolutely worth it. So that becomes part of what needs to underpin the creative thinking about how it is that we invest. On a more practical level, this means in many cases sort of doubling down on mixed-use neighborhoods. If you are a purely office district, then you are probably the one that is struggling the most. If you are a mixed-use neighborhood and are zoned accordingly, so we have some office, some residential, but it is a neighborhood or a submarket that is active and engaged and vibrant, around the clock. That becomes, that becomes the neighborhood that I think will succeed, in this later environment. Because otherwise, as you can imagine, sort of, if you're a purely residential neighborhood, you lack the amenitization, of anything that folks want to do when they actually leave their homes. And if you're a purely office neighborhood, then 4 to 5 days a week, you might look like a ghost town. And that's, neither one of those scenarios is sustainable. I would say, two other things that I'd add here. One is that, and again, this is sort of, something that has come, sort of emerged more significantly in the public consciousness, following the pandemic, is that there is a significant public health aspect to this. And although sort of, in the industry, for most of the folks that I work with know me best as sort of an economist and a finance person, I'm also sort of an epidemiologist focused on urban epi. And the way in which we think about and envision the built environment has extraordinary implications for individual and public health outcomes, whether it be chronic diseases or infectious diseases. We've just come off of a period of time where the relationship between certain aspects of density, and sort of, and public health outcomes, has been driven home for us. But when we also look across major cities around the world, what we'll also see is that differences in the way in which we create space, in which we create public spaces, more than the pandemic, have again these sort of very, very significant implications for what chronic disease outcomes look like for large populations. And as we get older as a country, are thinking about, well, how do we build? How do we create public spaces? What do residential neighborhoods and residential units look like? And what does that imply for the kinds of cancer-related, obesity-related cancers that we might observe, for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes rates? There is a very, very strong linkage here that I think in the real estate and urban world, we are only beginning to explore. So those are some of the issues that I think, certainly on the academic and policy side, we're thinking about very, very carefully right now in trying to help inform a conversation around how it is that we build much more resilient and relevant cities for the next generation.
Yeah, yeah. For anybody, I know our audience is generally very invested in the built environment, right? We've got C-suite leaders from architecture, engineering, construction, real estate, and technology and innovation officers, et cetera. But if you're tuning into this and you've never thought about the true impact of the built environment, what Sam just ran down, I think was an incredible example of, you know, we started out talking about offices and office space, and we've gone all the way through and talked about the implications of all of these things, all the way related to obesity, cancer, et cetera. Built environment impacts everything, and that's part of the power. Part of the reason that we need to have these conversations, part of the power of having these conversations. So if you're watching this and listening to this saying, hey, I want to know more, I want to get more out of this. We've only got 15 minutes for these shadow shorts. What I would recommend to you is that you go to shadowsummit.com. Let me put that up on the screen, bottom left-hand corner of your screen right now, shadowsummit.com. That's the URL for the landing page for our summit, 7th annual Shadow Summit, coming up in October, the 24th through 26th in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Sam Chandan will be one of our keynote speakers, and you will certainly get deeper into this conversation there in Atlanta. The whole design of the Shadow Summit is purposefully compact, purposefully intimate, a maximum of 200 seats in the auditorium there at the facility at Georgia Tech, on the campus of Georgia Tech in Atlanta. We're going to have conversations like this. We're going to talk about generative AI, about housing, about infrastructure, about skilled labor gaps, everything having to do with the built environment. And we're setting the tone for investment and innovation in the built environment in 2024. So go to shadowsummit.com and hit the apply button. It is a curated group of topics, a curated group of attendees. Hit the apply button, find out how to get tickets for Shadow Summit, and join us for more conversations and much deeper conversations than the one that Sam and I have just had over the past 15 minutes. Sam Chandan, founding director of the Chen Institute for Global Real Estate at NYU Stern. Thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for all of the insights you just shared. And I'm looking forward to meeting you and talking to you in Atlanta later this year.
Likewise, I'll see you in Atlanta. Have a wonderful weekend.
Great. You too. Thanks, Sam. And thanks to everybody out there. I'll be back Monday with another Shadow Short. Again, another expert, a thought leader in the realm of innovation for the built environment. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.